Hello, everyone. My name is Olivia Skeen, and today's presentation we're going to be looking at people with dyslexia and what their lives look like. So to start with, dyslexia is the most common learning disability, and it does not affect intelligence. It typically affects linguistic and comprehension skills, and it can make things take a little bit more time and be a little bit more challenging for the students. So my main goal was to focus on how dyslexia affects life in the classroom and then afterwards in the workplace. I wanted to do this to try to understand more of the practical and emotional struggles since this is such a common learning disability. And then I wanted to look specifically into what schools look like as well as what the workplace looked like to see if there are any accommodations and what can be done. I decided to interview Valerie Skeen, who is a teacher who has experience with teaching dyslexic students, and she was able to shed a lot of insight onto these subjects. And my previous knowledge came from my father and my brother, who also have dyslexia. So here are some of my course materials that I use. So People with Invisible Disabilities Fight for Understanding. That was a very helpful article that helped explain that people tend to be discriminated against even more so when they don't have a visible disability, for example, a wheelchair, because a lot of times people just think like, oh, you're going to think just like I do, when in reality, people can have more differences and they tend to have less understanding and compassion. Another fascinating read was that some people with learning disabilities have less than adequate health care, which is really concerning and something that needs to be addressed. For some of my own research that I did, I looked into some of the developmental and behavioral concerns when it comes to adults with dyslexia. What does it look like? What are some of the problems that they face? The biggest one that I kept seeing was spelling and reading comprehension are going to be two of the biggest issues, and that it's going to take someone with dyslexia a little bit more extra time to complete assignments where it's going to take a little more reading or writing on those ends. And then lastly, the article I found most interesting was on diagnosing adults with dyslexia, how it's much harder for adults to get diagnosed because adult psychologists, they use the same tests that they would for children, but they are less frequently trained in this as much as child psychologists are. They've been better prepared for this. And so a lot of times adults are not adequately given the correct testing that they need or the correct interpretations just because the psychologists tend to have less experience when it comes to diagnosing those. So this is my interview from Valerie. As you can see, I have confirmation that I was interviewing her as well as some of my handwritten notes right there. So some of the main points that she said was that breaking up larger assignments into smaller, clear chunks is incredibly helpful to do. Another thing she suggested is utilizing electronics and speaking devices. Those can be incredibly helpful. Pardon the interruption. My dog decided that now was the perfect time to play. And using electronics can be incredibly helpful for someone that has a harder time reading and writing on their own. It can help catch more errors. Asking for clarification is another important thing. Asking if they understand and then asking them to repeat it back to you. And then lastly, she explained that there is definitely an increased pressure for academic excellence and for college. Back when she went to school, there was not the same expectation of everybody going to college. And there's almost more of this unfair pressure, especially for kids with dyslexia, expecting them to go to college, when in reality, academics is not everyone's thing. Some of the important things to do to better support people with dyslexia and include them is allowing more time. So with different assignments or projects, that will definitely help people be able to accomplish things better and to the best of their capabilities, especially in the workforce and at school. Another thing to promote equity with students with dyslexia or adults with dyslexia is to provide good accommodations. So again, letting them have multiple things to help them spell check and make sure what they're saying is coherent and it's coming out how they actually mean to say it in their mind and it's being translated that same way on paper. Providing additional time is huge just because it tends to take them a little bit more time to think and process and get their thoughts together. And then lastly, allowing for electronics. There's lots of very helpful programs that can make a huge difference for someone with dyslexia. Lastly, one of the best things you can do to help them access what they need to do is making them aware of their resources. So there are people who can help them and try to work with them, to partner with them to see what they can do. And then helping them understand what their resources are, because there are quite a few resources out there and a lot of electronic programs that can be incredibly helpful, just not everyone is aware of these programs. So after looking into dyslexia a little bit more, I am definitely curious to know how dyslexia enhances the lives of those who have it. It definitely helps with creativity, and there's a lot of other really cool benefits that come to a brain that thinks a little bit differently that I started looking into, but I definitely have a lot more to learn. I am hoping to learn more about this by asking people with dyslexia just kind of how their brain works and how they process different things to try to see the world through their eyes, as well as looking at some online research. So my question for you guys is, do you know anyone with dyslexia? What has their experience been at school or at work? And how could you support someone with a learning disability? Any ideas there? Thanks so much for listening.